Hopefully, everybody who ever fell asleep in morning Bible studies will miss me even more than I miss them. It's like my buddy, was it Tyler? Yeah, where's Tyler at? Hey, and Mason too. How's it going, Tyler? Hey, how'd the week turn out for you, man? Is it pretty good? You glad you came? I'm glad you came. Remember, one time I caught you having fun. You remember that time? Yeah, you were trying to be bored, but you couldn't help it. All right, well, I don't know if you guys follow tennis much. If you don't, you just go like this. Wimbledon is going on right now. Great tournament, tennis tournament. And Andre Agassi, have you ever heard of him? Andre Agassi was a tennis player, a great tennis player who hated tennis. And he hated himself. Because in his mind, to Andre Agassi, tennis was who he was. There was no separating Agassi from tennis. They were the same. Andre Agassi turned pro on his 16th birthday. That's the day that he was baptized into his identity as a tennis player. It was his coming out to the world. It was his public declaration, I am tennis and tennis is me. And it was honestly the only choice that Andre Agassi thought he had. If you are a senior in high school and you just graduated, you're about to head to college, maybe even for some of you who are seniors in high school, I would highly recommend to you that you read Andre Agassi's memoir, his autobiography called Open. It is one of the 5 best books that I've ever read. You ought to read that right along with the Gospel of Matthew. And then you should grab somebody about 10 to 15 years older than you and start talking with them about the things you're reading, both in the Gospel of Matthew and in Andre Agassi's autobiography. Because Agassi's book is about identity. And so is your life. It's what we've been talking about all of this weekend. It's about finding out who you are. It's about finding out, amidst all the different things that you know are true about you, what is the truest? Most of us spend at least a part of our lives trying to be somebody that we aren't because we're convinced that we don't have a choice. I remember middle school at the peak of one of my own identity crises, watching Agassi's life play out on the TV screen as I watched him play Wimbledon. I remember watching him in the commercials that he used to do on television. So I saw the Canon camera commercials that he did. And so the way that these things went is Agassi, who had his headband and long hair, he was a rebel, and that's why they had him advertising for the Canon Rebel camera, right? And so he had this long mullet hair, which was cool back then, and a bandana. He had these sunglasses on, and he had, also cool back then, these acid wash denim shorts. He's the first guy to ever wear jorts in an actual tennis match. That was Andre Agassi. And he took his hot pink shirt off after his match and threw it into the crowd. And then he climbs out of his white Lamborghini and looks me in the eye. I'm this little middle school kid on the other end of the television screen. And he pulls down his glasses and lowers them down just so his eyes can peer into the screen, into the camera, and he says, "Image is everything." All right, that was the commercial. I wanted to buy that camera so bad, I didn't even know how to use it. As a middle schooler, you know what I thought? I thought, he's cool. He is so cool. I want to be like that. I thought, yes, image is everything. How did Agassi get that image? I want that image. I need to work on my image. I need some acid wash jorts. But little did I know, and I actually didn't find this out until I read his book a few years ago, he hated that phrase, image is everything. He actually didn't even believe it. But he was a prisoner to it. Here's what he wrote in his book, Open, about that ad slogan. He said, image is everything. What's that supposed to mean? Beats me. It's for a camera company. But overnight, the slogan becomes synonymous to me. Sports writers liken it to my inner nature, my essential being. They say it's my philosophy, my religion, and they predict it will be written on my tombstone. They say I'm nothing but image. I have no substance because I haven't won a major tournament. Fans at my matches begin taunting me with the slogan, come on, Andre, image is everything. They yell it when I win, and they yell it when I lose. So what do you do when an ad slogan begins to define you? When everyone thinks that you're just about image, no substance, well, you got to go out and prove them wrong. You got to go do something spectacular, right? And so Agassi won his first Grand Slam tournament. He won Wimbledon, and he thought when he won Wimbledon, finally, I've lived up to all the hype. Finally, I can rest, and I can prove to everyone that I'm a winner. And he proved it to everyone except himself. I remember watching that Wimbledon match in 1992. I was a freshman in high school, acne-ridden, soul-searching, trying to figure out who I was. And to me, I'm looking at a guy who's winning Wimbledon on the other end of the television, and I'm going, that guy, he knows who he is. That guy, he knows what he's doing. That guy, he doesn't have any problems. Agassi had arrived in my mind. Little did I know, even as that match was taking place, him winning Wimbledon in 1992, he was still trying to figure out who he was. Listen to this from his book. He said, I didn't feel that Wimbledon had changed me. I feel, in fact, that I've been let in on a dirty little secret. Winning changes nothing. Now that I've won a Grand Slam, I know something that very few people on earth are permitted to know. A win doesn't feel nearly as good as a loss feels bad, and the good feeling doesn't last as long as the bad. Not even close. But almost like an insane disease, Agassi kept chasing his identity through accomplishing more, through getting more trophies. And he was good at it. He won Olympic gold medals. He became number one in the world in tennis. He is only the fifth man in history to win all 4 Grand Slam tournaments. He won more than $31 million in prize money. And, by the way, he married a supermodel. But each time he achieved a new level of success, he tasted that inner dissatisfaction of actually getting what he wanted. And he never changed what deep down he hated about himself. He could not escape this belief that at the deepest level, he was only a tennis player. It wasn't until his best friend's daughter was in a terrible accident, and as she suffered in the hospital, she complained. He went to see her, and she complained to Andre about being hot. So Andre ran out, and he got the biggest, most powerful window air conditioner, took it up in the hospital, flew the window open, put this thing in the window, turns it on full blast, all the way cold, and just blows it in this little girl's face. Full blast. And at that moment, in helping that little girl, he realized something. In pouring himself out, in serving someone who was in anguish, in pain, he realized something. He got a glimpse of what it really means to be Andre Agassi, what it really means to be human. Listen to this. A look of pure relief and gratitude and joy washed over her face. And in this look, in this courageous little girl, I find the thing that I've been seeking. The thing that unites all the experiences, good and bad, of the last few years, her suffering, her resilient smile in the face of that suffering, my part in easing her suffering. This is the reason for everything. This is why we're here. to fight through the pain, and when possible, to relieve the pain of others. So simple, so hard to see. I'd forgotten. It's in hospital hallways that we know what life is about. After all these years, I've got what I always wanted. Something to play for that's larger than myself and yet still closely connected to me. Something that bears my name but isn't about me. Look, that is what all of us want. That is what we talked about you're created for as a human, to go outward, to be fruitful and multiply. The gifts of the Spirit come so that you can serve and love other people, sacrifice for them. It's what every false identity is searching for. Every one-night stand, every drunk party goer, every legendary sports star, every multi-million-dollar actor, every overachieving student, every hovering mother, every overworking father, everybody is looking for the exact same thing, an identity that we can own, that we have a part in, that bears our name, but isn't about us. A big story that our little story can play up into. See, we find our greatest delight when we are so sure about who we are that we can then pour ourselves out to serve others. If you're a high school student, again, especially you seniors, you're about to start a part of your life that has more freedom for you to choose and try out things to define your identity more than any other time in your life. But listen closely to me, seniors. Don't confuse your freedom of choice with real freedom. Real freedom is when you are doing exactly what God created you to do. I want you to know when you head to college, I want you to know that it's not this rite of passage that every person has to go through. It's not a necessary evil to hunt down every possible identity for yourself in the bedrooms of strangers or the bottom of bottles or even studying under a desk lamp at a cubicle. You don't have to go hard finding an identity. You have one in Jesus Christ already. See, there's a way to short circuit that whole process of looking for who you want to be. But it's not easy. In fact, to live for something that's larger than you but still remains connected to you, it is going to mean difficulty. It is going to mean a resilient smile in the face of suffering. It's going to mean perseverance and pushing through. But that resilient smile is going to come from the most authentic joy you've ever had in your life, because you will be at complete peace with who you are. Tonight, you're going to find that Jesus was tempted just like Andre Agassi was, just like you are, and just like I am. He was tempted to forget the truest thing about him. We are tempted to forget that we are created in God's image, to be His children, to be His sons and daughters. And once you believe that you are image bearers of God, then yes, image is everything. Look at Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4 tonight, as we finish out our brief time in Matthew 3 and 4. Remember last night, Jesus was just baptized and walked out into the desert. It says that the Spirit led him to be tempted by the devil. And that's where we're going to pick up tonight. Matthew 4. Starting in verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city, and he set him on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, again, it's written, "You shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these I give you, if you will fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, be gone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him. That's the word of the Lord from Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 3, Jesus is baptized. Remember, the clouds broke, and a voice from heaven announced exactly who Jesus was. You heard from God the Father, this is my Son with whom I'm well pleased. And then in the very next verse, Jesus walks out into the wilderness, and he hears the devil's voice saying, are you sure you're God's son? Listen, knowing who you are is life-changing, but knowing who you are in the face of 1,000 voices trying to tell you you're somebody you're not, that is life-saving. So before I show you what difference Jesus makes to your identity, let me show you 3 false identities that most of us have trouble shaking. See, you can't answer the question, who am I, with what you want, what you do, or what you have. You know, Instagram has one. So you get a certain number of characters, and you're supposed to tell the world who you are. Isn't that like this little moment of, I don't know? Right, what do I put? I remember when I filled out my Twitter bio, I was like, do I, husband, dad, pastor, I like naps and chili dogs. What do I put in here? I got 147 characters and a thumbnail to tell the world who I am. See, what we find in those little social media bios is that it seems nearly impossible for us to say who we are outside of those 3 categories: what we want, what we do, or what we have. Because most of us think that those things are the truest things about us, but they're not. See, the devil in this passage tempts Jesus in 3 ways out in the desert, and they are all attempts to change Jesus' mind about who he is. That's what the devil's trying to do out there. He just wants to change. He wants him to disbelieve the voice of his Father that he just heard. See, the first 2 attempts in verse 6 and verse 3. You see how they start? Okay, if you are the Son of God, if it's true that you're the Son of God, in other words, the devil takes something God has already said about Jesus, and he doesn't say, that's not true. He just says, you'll need to prove it. His word's not good enough. You need to test him, which is, by the way, exactly what he did in Genesis 3 in the garden, right? Oh, that's what God said? Why don't we make him prove it? Do you really think, this is the way he works. Do you really think, Jesus, that the Son of God is supposed to starve to death? What kind of father is that? Make bread, feed yourself. Don't you think if your Father really loves you, that when you jump off this tower, he'd let you die? So jump. Listen, that temptation is not just something Jesus experiences in the wilderness. It's something any child of God will hear over and over and over. Here's the way it works in our lives. This is the voice you hear. So you're a child of God, huh? And God loves you, is that right? Why are you struggling to pay bills then? If he loves you so much. If he loves you so much, why are you such a terrible job? If he loves you so much, why are your parents getting divorced? If he loves you so much, why did he let your parents treat you that way? Isn't a good father supposed to protect you? Are you sure you belong to God? That's the way the devil tempts you. And see, when you begin to doubt, he dangles a different identity in front of you. He says, all right, so if you're not a child of God, what else can you be? Tennis player? Winner of Wimbledon? Dating a supermodel? The funny guy? The classy girl? The smart kid? The nice guy? And what his hope is that you spend your life chasing an identity, never attaining it, because he knows, just like Agassi found out, when you finally get what you've been chasing, when you finally get what you want, when you finally perform all the way to the ceiling, And when your life is filled with good looks and accolades and trophies, all you'll want to hear is God's voice saying, I love you, kid. But see, that's exactly what you already have. That's exactly what you left behind. It's exactly what you had already given you as a gift before you started chasing all the other stuff. See, Jesus, look verse 2 and 3. Jesus was first tempted to make his life about getting what he wanted, right? See, he was hungry. So the devil says, you're hungry? You have the power to make bread? Feed yourself, right? This is the old animal desire. You're hungry? Feed yourself. If you want it and you have the power to do it, nothing else matters. You should feed it. You are what you want. You are your desires. That's our culture's view on everything from food to sex. As long as you aren't hurting anyone, go ahead and do it. Because you are what you want. Don't deny yourself. That's not being authentic, is it? That our culture says to you, this is the voice of Satan to you, the truest thing about you is what you desire. So YOLO. See, this is a temptation for Jesus to use his power to satisfy himself. But Jesus knows that there's something so much deeper to his identity than feeding his stomach. Now look in verse 5 and 6. So the devil comes back again. He comes back with a different temptation. And this time, he tempts Jesus to base his identity on what he does. See, Satan takes Jesus up to the top of a tower and he tells him, win Wimbledon. Right? He takes him up and he says, do something spectacular. Base your identity on base jumping, right? Just show people what you're worth. Parachute off this bad boy. Let the angels catch you. Never mind that you're the Son of God. What good is being the Son of God if you can't do spectacular magic tricks to prove that you're the Son of God? Think of how the people would love you. Think of how the people would cheer. They'd stand up and they'd tell you how awesome they are. Shouldn't they do that for the Son of God anyway? Come on, jump. You know, this was Andre Agassi's problem. If you could just be a pro. Okay, if you can just win a grand slam. No, I mean, if you could just get to number one in the world. Just perform a little more and then you'll finally know who you are. Just perform a little more. Just do something a little more spectacular. And then you'll convince everybody who you are and you can rest. You'll know exactly who you are. But Jesus knows what it took Andre Agassi years to figure out, that the more spectacular things you do, the more people just want more miracles. The more success you have, the more you'll tell yourself you have to rise to the next level to be better than the next person. You got to be better than the next person. You will never be satisfied. Jesus knows when he's tempted by the devil that he's not here to do spectacular magic tricks. He knows that being the Son of God doesn't mean making flying leaps off of buildings to prove himself. He knows who he is before he has to do anything. He's heard the voice of his Father. And then finally, the last temptation, verse 8 and 9. The devil says, okay, all right, so I hear that you're supposed to be a king. Right? You're supposed to be some kind of God that should rule, right? Didn't the prophets write about how you would rule nations? Great. I can help with that. All you have to do is when I say, who's your daddy, you say, you are Satan, and then I'll give you a kingdom. See, Satan's final temptation is for Jesus to define himself by what he has, his possessions. Kings have kingdoms. Sons have an inheritance. And the devil looks at Jesus and just says, all right, you're a king, define yourself by this kingdom that I give you. And look, you and I are all too familiar with that temptation to define ourselves by what we have. Right? You ever get a new phone or a new car or a new house or a new computer? You know, what is it about new stuff that we get something new on the outside and somehow we feel brand new on the inside, right? Like we're better people. You know, when it's time for the phone upgrade, it's almost like you become this better person. Look at this phone I have. This one takes movies, right? This one, I saw the iPhone 6S, I saw a commercial for it, and it was something like the pictures move on it or something, and I think I already have that. It's called the video, right? What is that? It's like, Look at these pictures that move. I'm like, bro, this isn't the last one. It's a video camera. But that's the way we do. That's why we stand for 4 hours in a line outside the Apple store to get the newest iPhone, because it makes us feel brand new, because we define ourselves so much by our possessions. But the next morning or the next month or the next year, that phone is cracked and it's being sold in a yard sale. Or a person makes you feel, you feel brand new because you got a girl or a guy on your arm and they make you feel brand new. But then you break up. We always wake up with an identity hangover when we define ourselves by what we have. We finally realize that the phone is just a phone. And no matter how high we stack the cash, it never reaches heaven. And we're left saying, just like Andre Agassi, well, the win doesn't feel nearly as good as the loss feels bad. Jesus, in the face of temptation to doubt his Father's word that he heard from heaven, "This is my Son with whom I'm well pleased," said no to the devil about making his identity about what he wanted or what he did or what he had, because he knew that being the Son of God meant something else. He knew exactly what it meant to be the Son of God, and it wasn't any of those things that the devil was offering. See, he knew that being a king meant being your servant, and that being a son meant being your substitute. You know, even though that I know that all of you are here with a church, I don't for a second assume that everybody here thinks reading the Bible is important. In fact, a recent survey of Christians showed that over a third of people who consider themselves committed evangelical Christians don't think reading the Bible is really important to being a Christian. Can I just time out? They're wrong. Reading your Bible is ridiculously important. So here's a question for you. What is the Bible good for? So if you're going to describe it to a friend, right? Say you have a friend who knows nothing about the Bible, and they say, well, why should I read this Bible? How would you describe it? Would you say, hey, the Bible is basic instructions before leaving earth? Or, the Bible is kind of like my playbook. Or to an athlete, you might say that. Or maybe you'd say something like, the Bible is kind of like a manual for how to live life God's way. Well, listen, and listen to me carefully. If that's how you would describe the Bible, if that is the primary way that you see the Bible, with all, and I mean this sincerely, with all due respect, you are interpreting it like the devil. Did you notice that every single time that Jesus' identity is confronted by the devil, did you notice that they talk about the Bible? Both Jesus and the devil in this quote Bible verses to each other. It's almost like a Bible quiz thing. It's like this Bible trivia thing happening back and forth, except it's very much not trivial. Jesus quotes a verse from the Old Testament in each of the 3 instances. The devil directly quotes a psalm when Jesus is on top of the tower. And inherent in every temptation, the devil is playing off of something that Jesus read in his Old Testament or heard directly from the Father. All 3 of the devil's temptations are aimed at Jesus' identity as either a son or a king. All right, so look at this. Let me show you. The first one is about being a son, right? He says, if you are a son of God, so essentially he's saying a son of God shouldn't be hungry. A good dad feeds his kids, right? The second one, so the first one's about being a son. The second temptation is about both. It's about his identity as a son and his identity as a king. Because the goal is that when he throws himself off this tower, that he's rescued by angels like a father would rescue a son, and then everyone will follow him and worship him like a king would be followed and worshipped. And then the third one is all about being a king, right? The devil says, hey, you're a king. Here, why don't you take these kingdoms? In other words, listen to me. The devil is fine with Jesus reading the Old Testament and realizing that he is the Son of God. He's fine with that. And the devil is absolutely fine with Jesus reading the Old Testament and realizing that he's the King of Kings. He uses this in his temptation. He's got no problem with Jesus reading the Bible that way. as long as the devil gets to define what it means to be a son and what it means to be a king. The devil is 100% okay with Jesus getting a bunch of followers as long as all Jesus is a good example. As long as all Jesus is a prophet that teaches you things. As long all that Jesus is somebody who just gives you a playbook for your life. But the Bible is not an instruction manual. The Bible is not mainly some kind of playbook for your life. The Bible is not mainly about telling you how to live your life. There's a part of it, there's a way, but it's a derivative. It's not the big picture of what the Bible's about. The Bible is an autobiography of God. It's not good advice. It's good news. Look, let me show you. Matthew 3:16 and 17. Just before this event in the desert happens, Jesus is baptized, right? And he hears the voice of the Father. This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. Now, do you know that phrase is not just something that God the Father came up with on the spot? Right? It's not that he was just bursting with pride at Jesus' baptism, and then from the heavens, God the Father says, hey, that's my boy. Like Jesus just scored a touchdown, and God the Father stand up going, yeah, that's my boy right there scoring a touchdown. That's not what this is. See, this is a quote from something God said a long time ago. In fact, it's a mashup. You guys ever listen to mashup songs? This is a mashup quote from the Old Testament. God the Father is taking 2 chapters of the Old Testament, summarizing them in one phrase, and then putting them together. I'm not gonna put it on the screen, but you can go and read these later. One of these comes from Psalm 2. One of these comes from the second Psalm, and the other one comes from the prophet Isaiah in the 42nd chapter. So Psalm 2 and Isaiah 42. You want to go study this? You can do it later. All right, Psalm 2 and Isaiah 42 are 2 very strange passages to put together. Psalm 2, you know what Psalm 2 is about? It's about a son and a king. That's what Psalm 2 is about. It's about a son, suffering servant. Isaiah 42 is about a servant who dies. And at his baptism, God says, he mashes Psalm 2 and he mashes it up with Isaiah 42, and he is saying from heaven, this is the son and king I told you about, but this is also the suffering and dying servant I told you about, all in the same person. For the Jewish people, this is a declaration that the king is a servant and that the son is going to suffer. And the devil's temptation, here, listen to this. This is what the devil's temptation to Jesus is. It is for Jesus to believe Psalm 2 till the cows come home. You're a son, you're a king, while he quietly brushes away the passages about a suffering servant. The devil's tempting Jesus to believe that the Bible is a book about how he acts instead of a book that tells him who he is. The devil is tempting Jesus to be a good example instead of a suffering servant. Don't rely on your father. Feed yourself. Move out of the place of weakness and into the place of strength. That's the devil's temptation. Throw yourself off the temple and show them you're invincible. Don't die. Show them you can't die. Don't be a suffering servant. Be the son. Be the king. Skip the cross and take the crown. That's the temptation. In other words, the devil wants Jesus to establish a religion like every other religion on the earth. He's saying, I want you to come down as an example, not as a savior. I want you, Jesus, why don't you just come down in strength and say, be like me, and then I'll save you. Don't come down in weakness and say, I'll come live the life you were supposed to live for you and die the death that you're condemned to die for your sin. Jesus, don't tell him that. No, Jesus, come in power, not weakness. Start a religion, get followers, give people something to live up to, give them something to achieve. And then when they turn pro, then you tell them they better win a grand slam if they're going to get your love. And then when they win that, then you tell them they better get to number one. And if they do that, then you tell them they got to marry a supermodel. Keep raising the stakes on them. Show people a good example and then tell them to do their best. That's the way the devil wants you to read the Bible. That's what the devil wanted Jesus to do. Skip Isaiah 42. Do not be a suffering servant. Listen, every other religion says you live a good life and give that good life to God, and maybe God will be impressed with something that you do and then be good to you. But Christianity says Jesus lived a righteous life in your place, and he is giving it to you. Look at John 1:12. It says, to those who believed in the name of Jesus, he gives us the right to be children of God. That's past tense. That's before you lift a finger. That's before you have a chance to win a single point with God. It's before you prove yourself to anyone. God says, if you'll trust my son, the King, who suffered and died in your place as your substitute, I give you an identity that will last forever. Through high school, through college, through adulthood, when you retire, and into eternity, right now and forever, you will be my child with whom I'm well pleased. Period. He's not asking you to bring anything to him. He's not asking you to prove yourself. He's telling you who you are. And here's how that changes everything. See, if you believe Jesus is an example and not a substitute, if you believe the Bible is a book of rules or instructions, more than this revelation of a God that died in your place, when you face difficulty and suffering, you will have to say either, I deserve better than this because I've been living right, because of what I've done. I can't believe God would treat me like this. Haven't I given him everything? And then you'll hate the God who's trying all along to tell you that he loves you. Or, if you feel like a failure, if you feel like you can't keep the rules and you keep letting Jesus, your great, powerful example, down, you'll tell yourself, I deserve this pain. My life has fallen apart because I haven't been a good person, and so now I'm being punished. And frankly, Satan doesn't care which of those two stories you believe, as long as you believe one of those two. But if you read the Bible as the story of a son and a king who came as your substitute, if you see Jesus not as the founder of a religion, but the God who lived a life that you couldn't live for you and suffered and died in your place in the face of the deepest pain and suffering that come into your life, you'll say, I'm his beloved child. Because of Jesus, I know he's pleased with me. And all the pain and the suffering in your life, all the disappointment and failure that may come your way, you'll say, I know this is not punishment because Jesus already took that from me on the cross. And so I know that whatever is coming into my life is here to grow me, or God is giving me something so that as he comforts me, 2 Corinthians 1, I can pass that comfort on to someone else. I can be someone else's servant. I can go outward to people who are hurting and serve them because I know exactly who I am. Or maybe some of that suffering and difficulty is coming into your life because that's the way God is chiseling away at your pride. God is chiseling away to make you into something, a more clear image of who he is. But you can be sure that it is not his wrath against sin. That's on Jesus. And all the time the Spirit will testify to you, I'm a beloved child. I'm a beloved child. And see, that is how the resilient smile comes through in the face of suffering. Listen, Jesus is a better Adam. Jesus is a better Israel. And Jesus is a better you. And Jesus is a better me. That's what the Bible's pointing you to. There's one more thing I didn't tell you about this passage. This moment in Matthew 4 is huge in the big story of the Bible. So you remember when God created the world, he made Adam. And Adam was surrounded by a beautiful garden. It was everything that any of us could ever want. And in the middle of paradise, Adam was tested. by the devil, and he failed. And then he was cursed and he was sent out into the wilderness. Thousands of years later, the people of God, Israel, came along. By the way, Adam was called the son of God in either Matthew or Luke's genealogy of Jesus. Thousands of years later, Israel come along. You know what Israel's called? The son of God. In the middle of a desert, on the way to a promised land that was supposed to be flowing with milk and honey, right? Israel was tested, and they failed. They suffered then in the wilderness and wandered around in the desert, unable to go into the promised land. Centuries later, Jesus came along, the real Son of God, and while he was in the desert, he was tested by the devil, but this time the Son of God passed. And I love this last part in verse 11. When Jesus passed the test, he came out of the wilderness and he sat down to a feast. This is the way I picture it anyway. It says the angels came and ministered to him. You know what I picture? Picture a big old long table, tons to eat, angels waving big palm branch fans, cold, Jesus with a cold glass of sweet tea. And on the other side of the wilderness was the paradise Adam gave up. The comfort of his Father. Jesus has found it for us. See, Jesus succeeded where Adam failed. Jesus succeeded where Israel failed. And listen, Jesus succeeded where you and I fail all the time. And because of that, now by simply trusting him, by taking him as your substitute instead of your example, he gives us back the garden, and the angels minister to us. He's holding out paradise for you, not because you deserve it, but because he passed the test and he deserves it. Because the Son substituted, because the King served, you and I have the right to become children of God, and all the rights and privileges that come along with that are ours, including stepping out of the wilderness one day into new heavens and new earth, where finally there is no more wilderness, only garden, and we will eat at the marriage supper of the Lamb with Jesus. Except he says it'll be wine, not sweet tea at that supper. At the end of the age, at the end of the story, you and I will never be tempted again. Forever. You understand what that word means? Forever. Eternal. Think of the longest period of time that you can think of and then multiply it times infinity. Forever. We will all know exactly who we are because we know exactly who he is. And that means, listen, that means that right now, today, when you guys get up in the morning and you head back to your communities, to your cities, to your schools, to your houses, to your broken families maybe, that means that right there in the middle of all the pain and hurt that might be happening in your life, that you can begin to serve outward, that you can lay down your life for someone else. You can live for something bigger than yourself while you're still connected to an identity that you're sure you'll never lose. Right now, today, with your faith in Christ as your substitute, you can say, just like Andre Agassi, I've got what I've always wanted. Right now, tonight, something to live for that's larger than me, yet still closely connected to me. Something that bears my name. I'm a son of God. I'm a daughter of God, but isn't about me. It's about him. See, you don't have to be what you want. You don't have to be what you do. And you don't have to be the stuff you have. You can be a beloved child of God, a royal priesthood, and you can serve others like the royal king served you. That's what he's equipped you to do. Now, go do it. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I don't know the way that you've called each one of these kids in the room. I don't know, Father, what you want, what the intricacies of your plan for their life is, but there's one thing I do know. There's one thing I know for certain, and that is that you are calling them to believe that Jesus died in their place and rose to make a way for them into new creation. You want them to believe that. You want them to be a part of your family. I also know, Father, that when their trust is in you, that they will begin to be humbled. They will begin to think less of themselves and begin to think of how they can serve others because they're sure of their identity, and they can go to people in these identity crises and they can share the love of Christ with them. I know, Father, that you want them to be cold air of an air conditioner on the face of a little girl in a hospital. You want them to be, Father, light in a dark world. They've exhibited that tonight, Father, just in sacrificing so that someone else can live in this mission offering tonight. It's a small sacrifice, but it's an example, Father, of their faith. And I pray that that will blow up personally in their lives. Some of these students you may be calling to some kind of full-time ministry. You may be calling missionaries to go to the nations. Right now in this room, that may be what some of the students have discovered this week. You may be calling pastors and youth pastors and college pastors and worship leaders. You may be calling campus ministers. That may be happening in their lives. I don't know. But Father, I pray that you will make that call clear. You may be calling business people to move to cities like Beijing and Hong Kong, cities in India like New Delhi, and the things that they're going to learn in college, Father, they'll move to a city and they'll open a business so that they can live there and begin to tell people about Jesus there. And they won't be, quote, professional missionaries. They might not even be a pastor, but Father, they certainly will be following a call. You may be calling some of these young men and women to be doctors or teachers. But whatever they do, Father, I pray they do it knowing that you are not calling them to mount up trophies on a wall. You're calling them to give themselves away so that others can live. So will you firm up for them, Father, in the conversations that they have tonight in Checkpoint? Will you begin to put some parameters around what that calling might look like? Father, I want to pray especially tonight for the seniors, those who have just graduated and are headed to college, even those seniors going into their senior year. Father, the things that are ahead of them be difficult. It's a whole new stage of life, one that's going to beckon, that Satan is going to come at them and tempt them to believe there's something they're not. And I pray, Father, that your Spirit will work mightily in them, that you will cement your word in their heart, that they would hide it there so that they might not sin against you, that they would find a church wherever they're headed to college that would support them and love them and feed them the gospel so that they would resist the temptation of Satan and continue to believe that their life is not their own. Us, a people who pour ourselves out because we've seen the King of the universe pour himself out for us. What a gift you've given us. We want to steward it well for your name's sake. Thank you for giving us an unshakable identity, sons and daughters of the King. In Jesus' name.